Hello again, friends, and welcome to Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell to talk about Shawn Elliott, the Gamecock offensive line coach and last year's interim head coach. Will take the head coaching job at Georgia State University in Atlanta. Wes, big news involving Gamecock football today. Shawn Elliott has been with the Gamecocks for 7 years. He's a South Carolina native, and he really did an admirable job last year when Steve Spurrier resigned mid-season. I think a lot of folks in the Gamecock Nation have tremendous respect for Shawn Elliott, and now he's moving on to Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is kind of one of those things that could sort of work out for both sides in the end. Obviously, Shawn Elliott's been at South Carolina for 7 years now, as you said. It's a situation where he has had some good lines. He's put, I think 5 guys in the NFL. He's had a chance to sort of put his stamp on the offensive line at South Carolina, and obviously there's been some good times, but obviously, we talked about it on the podcast all season long. The line was going to have to be better for South Carolina to improve offensively. And, what the answer was going to be there, I think people had different opinions on whether, Shawn Elliott should get another year or whether South Carolina should have went ahead and looked to make a change. So I think in this case, if you're Shawn Elliott, you sort of get a chance to go be a head coach, which is something that's obviously always been a dream of his. And if you're South Carolina, you can sort of, if you're Muschamp, you can go out and find a guy to come in and maybe make some changes on the offensive line. And I think that starts with maybe a little bit different recruiting strategy on the line as far as fixing that goes. But, it's not all that often, I think, that situations just work out completely perfectly for both sides. But in this case, I think you could really argue that this is a win-win for both Shawn Elliott and his family and South Carolina as far as fixing some of their offensive line issues.
Wes, 2 Gamecock offensive line commitments, Eric Douglas and Dennis Daly, have both come out and said that they're still firmly committed to South Carolina. What kind of effects will Elliott's departure have on recruiting?
Yeah, I don't expect it to have a huge effect on these guys that are committed. I think obviously Eric Douglas and Dennis Daly have already sort of made that very, very clear. I'm still trying to get in touch with Sonny Carlet, who's the other offensive line commitment, but in talking to someone close to him, I don't get the impression it's going to be much of an issue there either. He's actually, when I was trying to talk to him earlier, he was at school trying to do trying to make sure he was caught up on his schoolwork because he'll actually be out of class next week with the Shrine Bowl going on. So, I wouldn't read into the fact that Carlet, at least when we're recording this, has not said anything publicly yet. I imagine that he will stick. He's actually set to enroll at South Carolina in January. So, all these guys have really good relationships with Shawn Elliott. So I'm not trying to say that they didn't, because I think it's more of a situation of them just being happy for Shawn Elliott and Summer Elliott and their family, and an opportunity for him. And, it's a Georgia State program that I wasn't too familiar with, but I know they're in the process of having a big facilities upgrade there, and I think it's an opportunity that Shawn Elliott probably felt like he couldn't turn down, and I think these offensive line recruits sort of are aware of that, and now I think the big thing is moving forward is for South Carolina to get a hire made so that the new coach can come in and try to have a good finish to this recruiting class, because I think they're going to need more than 3 guys on the offensive line in this class. So certainly, if you're Will Muschamp, you want the right guy for the job, but it doesn't hurt if you could get a guy that maybe has some pre-existing relationships with some big-time offensive tackles out there.
It's always a feather in the cap of your program anytime one of your assistants is hired to be a head coach. So great news for Shawn Elliott today. Gamecocks losing a good one is Shawn Elliott, and he served the University of South Carolina football program well, Wes. And he inherited a very difficult situation last year, and there's been a lot of talk about the struggles of the Gamecock offensive line this year, but I don't think that should overshadow the fact that Shawn Elliott has been a tremendous asset to Gamecock football.
Well, and I honestly think sometimes people get a little bit caught up in, a guy as a position coach versus someone's skill set as a coordinator versus someone's skill set as a head coach, and I think in a lot of ways, sure, there's overlap, but, just because a guy is a great position coach doesn't mean they're going to be a great head coach. And just because a guy, maybe goes through a couple of bad years as a position coach doesn't mean they can't be a great head coach. So I actually think when you look at Shawn Elliott, and granted the record was not what anyone wanted it to be during the interim stint last year, when I look at the way he got those guys to play for him and to play so hard and to rally, I think he has what it takes to be a successful head coach. And you know what? I think that being the interim head coach last year is probably something that Shawn Elliott was able to learn from and sort of gather experience from and put on his resume. And, South Carolina can actually say that their last two offensive line coaches left to go on to head coaching positions. So, I don't know exactly how many schools can say that, but, Eric Wolford left to go be the Youngstown State head coach. So that position, strangely, has been a little bit of a stepping stone spot.
Wes, you talked briefly about possible replacements for Shawn Elliott as the Gamecocks offensive line coach. Let's talk about that for a moment. And I know we're very early in the process. News just coming out today that Shawn Elliott will be the next head coach at Georgia State University. So talk about possible replacements, Wes. Where might Will Muschamp turn to find his next offensive line coach?
Well, I think, first of all, I guarantee that Will Muschamp has somewhere in his office, or maybe even just in his head, a list. This isn't something that would have caught him by surprise. This is something that's been out there, rumored for a while. Muschamp no doubt has an idea of what direction he wants to go. I think if you look at his hiring patterns so far, you're going to, A, look at guys he's very, very familiar with. B, look for guys that have SEC experience. C, look for a guy that is a top-notch recruiter. However, one thing that stuck out to me when in Muschamp's introductory press conference is he basically said the three spots that you don't have to be, I'm paraphrasing, you don't have to be an elite recruiter is offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and offensive line. And that's because you have to be able to develop. Obviously, you want guys that can bring in players too, but first and foremost, you have to be able to develop guys because the offensive line is a developmental position. So, I think you look SEC experience, people that Muschamp's familiar with, and then after that, you look at a guy that's got a reputation as being a recruiter. I know fans have sort of started throwing out some top-notch names. Jeff Grimes is an offensive line coach that's got a lot of success in the SEC, has some ties to Muschamp. Stacy Searles is a guy that's at Miami now with Mark Richt that and has had stints at places when Muschamp has been there. Summers, who's Florida's offensive line coach, was actually hired by that's Mike Summers, who was hired by Muschamp at Florida. There's guys that have SEC and Muschamp ties that would make a lot of sense, but at this point in time, we don't really know exactly yet which way Muschamp's mind might be going. But I know he's on top of this thing. I thought it was an interesting note that Muschamp very early this afternoon had already been on the phone with those guys we were talking about, Dennis Daly, Eric Douglas, and he was already talking to them about the fact that he's got guys in mind that he's going to go out and hire a good offensive line coach to coach them up. So, I think that will probably come a bit clearer in the next few days, but no doubt that Muschamp already has guys in mind.
This is Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. We want you to download the Gamecock Central Radio app. We've got a free phone app that's available on the App Store and on Google Play. The phone app allows you to listen to our podcast on your cell phone, anywhere you receive cell phone service. It is a free app. And to subscribe to these podcasts, search for Gamecock Central Radio on iTunes, SoundCloud, and other popular services, or visit radio.GamecockCentral.com. Wes, coaching change at South Florida this week as well. A lot of movement for both the Gamecocks and the South Florida Bulls this week as we look ahead to the Birmingham Bowl coming up on December the 29th. South Florida head coach Willie Taggart resigned to take the Oregon head coaching job. So South Florida will have an interim head coach for the bowl game. It'll be offensive coordinator T.J. Weist.
Yeah, and it's interesting. This type of stuff always comes up during bowl season. So I think that obviously affects South Florida. That's a little bit of help for South Carolina. Now, this team obviously knows what they're doing. veteran guys. They won 10 games this year. It's not going to be a massive effect, but South Florida won't have its head coach, and obviously he was very successful. So, that I think does have a bit of an effect on the game, just like South Carolina's offensive line situation will have a bit of an effect on the game. And I think a guy maybe at least worth mentioning in this conversation is Cedric Williams, who obviously was South Carolina's interim offensive line coach previously Emerson when Eric Warford left. And I think you would probably think Muschamp is going to talk to some guys that have a little bit more experience as full-time SEC offensive line coaches. But you look at Cedric Williams' resume, this is a guy, former Gamecock, that everybody who deals with Cedric Williams has positive things to say about him. So, I'm not saying he's definitely going to even be the interim offensive line coach, but it would certainly make sense for him to be the interim for the bowl game, and that could be a bit of maybe a tryout for him.
Okay. Wes, what are the chances that Muschamp tries to bring in the new OL coach for the bowl game? How soon do you think he'll make a move?
Yeah, I think generally you look at recruiting obviously as a big marker for all this. It has a effect on all this, but a dead period actually will begin pretty soon anyway, running through the Christmas holiday. So, I think it's much more going to be about getting the right hire versus making a quick hire. So, unless there's that guy that is just that perfect fit and he can already just make it happen right away, I wouldn't think this is a thing that Muschamp's going to have to rush. I think ideally you want to have this hire made by the early part of January. Once the recruiting dead period ends, you start having prospects on your campus again, so that prospects can come in, take official visits, and meet the new offensive line coach. So ideally, by like that January 13th weekend, when you could have some guys like T.J. Moore in, Eric Douglas, the commitment set, scheduled to visit that weekend. To me, that would be a sort of time that you want to have it done. But hey, if the absolute home run grand slam hire is out there and you have to wait, then I think still it's worth waiting.
All right, Gamecock offensive line coach Shawn Elliott will be the new head coach at Georgia State University, and he was the only holdover from the Steve Spurrier staff when Will Muschamp came on board late last year. So South Carolina getting ready to take on South Florida in the Birmingham Bowl, and Shawn Elliott on his way to Atlanta to take over at Georgia State. So we'll have more on the Gamecock search for an offensive line coach. Wes, we appreciate the update today. Thank you.
Thanks, Emerson. Have a good one, man.
All right, you too, bud. That's Wes Mitchell, and I'm Emerson Phillips, and this is Gamecock Central Radio. Thanks for being with us today.